Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Zachariah Renfro, and in today's video, we're going to learn a little bit about philosophy. We're going to learn what it is and why it might be important. I myself am a professional philosopher, and philosophy is one of those things that brings me great joy in life. So, philosophy is an organized study of life, a reasoned pursuit of fundamental truths. Socrates tells us that it is a method of examining life and examining the world around us through questioning. It is a way that we can come to understand things around us by breaking things down into different concepts and themes, getting to the root issue of many topics that we might face in life. There are several branches of philosophy. I divide them up into nine, and I'm going to go through each one of them in particular, starting off with logic. Logic is the study of the process of argumentation, rhetoric, and reasoning. And it is a process by which you can come to understand how arguments are made, how arguments are understood, and how reasoning is done. If that sounds a bit abstract, keep in mind that logic is the fundamental force behind mathematics, behind modern science, and behind modern computer programming. In fact, the first computer programmers were logicians. They were trained logicians and mathematicians, and they used their knowledge of logic and rhetoric to build the first computer programming languages. In fact, when we look at the works of Wittgenstein in his Logicus Tractatus, we see what is the foundation of modern computer science. Moving on to ethics, this is the study of how we ought to live our lives, the recent study of right and wrong. And it's what my personal focus has been on. We figure out what makes something a morally right thing, what makes something a morally wrong thing. Are there objective moral truths? What is the foundation of morality? Which leads nicely into metaphysics. Metaphysics is the study and understanding of things that exist beyond physics, the study of the most basic principles and where reality itself might come from. And even the name kind of gives a hint as to what it is. With physics, you study the mechanics of the universe. With metaphysics, you study the foundation for the mechanics of the universe, right? It provides the overall picture with which physics can build its system within. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. In many ways, modern epistemology is related to modern psychology. They have to go hand in hand to some extent, but whereas psychology is studying the specific aspects of the human psyche, epistemology is focused on how it is we can know certain things, right? And as there is new knowledge in the field of medical science and psychology about how knowledge is formed, how different parts of the brains interact, epistemology does update itself to keep pace. History of philosophy is partly history, partly philosophy, but it is the study of the basis of our ideas. In some ways, it's similar to cultural anthropology. In some ways, it's similar to history, but it is the foundation of our different ideas as we move through time as a society, right? Next, we have aesthetics. This is the study of art and the study of beauty. What makes something artistic? What makes something beautiful? What makes something meaningful? Why are some things important to us? And that's the study of aesthetics. Next is philosophy of religion. This is the use of philosophical reason in religion. It is the taking of different religious concepts and applying either an ethical lens or a metaphysical lens or an epistemological lens to help us understand the particular issue, right? For example, within modern Protestantism, there's a common belief that that you become saved in order to get to heaven. Well, a philosopher of religion might take that idea and ask, okay, well, how can you epistemologically know that you've been saved, right? Like, how can you square the circle on that? Next, we have social political philosophy, which in some ways is an offshoot of ethics. It is how governments and societies should act in one another in relation to one another, and how should individuals relate to the government. And social political philosophy provides the foundation for the political systems and for the systems of government and for human relations on a large scale. Then finally, we have philosophy of language. In some ways, this is related to logic. In some ways, it's related to epistemology. But it is the study of how these different artifacts of language interact with each other, how we understand them, and how we apply them to the real world. So, with all that being said, I think it would be kind of obvious for us to know how philosophy is different from religion, but let's take a little bit more of a detailed look, right? So, religion looks to divine revelation of some form to determine what man is meant to do, what man's relation to the universe is, whereas philosophers and philosophy sees man as the arbiter of truth, and that we have to use our reason to determine our relation to the universe, right? So, and these things aren't mutually exclusive. That's one thing I want to emphasize is that you know religion and philosophy, for most of human history, or at least for most of the history of philosophy, have more or less went hand in hand. Whether it is to argue for some religious principle or argue against some religious principle, they have not always been in contest with each other. In some ways, philosophy has been the handmaiden of religion, right? So we have to keep in mind that philosophy can be used to argue for religion, and it can be used to argue against different religions or religious practices or what have you. But just know that they are different, right? So, for example, when we were talking about that issue of saving grace earlier, right? A theologist, to try and answer this question, will look primarily to, say, a religious text, to the Bible or to some other revealed source, whereas a philosopher of religion might look to some source of reason, such as a source on epistemology or a source on philosophy, as well as the religious text, right? So they're going to try and come to some understanding, but they're going to use slightly different methods, which leads us to philosophy and science. So this is only a question that makes much sense in the modern age. Prior to the scientific revolution, prior to the 1800s or so, philosophy and science were more or less hand in hand. They were seen as direct corollaries with each other. And in fact, many of the earliest philosophers also did significant work in science and mathematics, right? About half of Aristotle's written work are different works in biology, right? So Leibniz, who is a philosopher, is also famous for his work in mathematics, particularly in calculus, right? So we have to keep in mind that philosophy and science frequently intersect with each other, and philosophy often provides us conceptual basis, right? Science seeks to understand the world through empirical data. Philosophy seeks to understand it through concepts and frameworks. And what does that mean? That means that science will say, study human interactions or study chemical interactions and determine what we can know based off of that. Whereas philosophy, it will look at those things, but it will also try and build a larger framework using whatever knowledge or reason we can. And although that might not sound important, we have to keep in mind that if it is not for that conceptual framework, then a lot of scientific data and scientific theories don't make a lot of sense. They don't have the basis for us to understand them. After hearing all this great discussion, you might be asking, is philosophy useful? Can it help me with my life? I would say, yes, it has. So, just a little pedigree on myself. I have an associate's in science, a bachelor's in philosophy, realtor's license, an accounting, a bachelor's accounting certificate, a master's in philosophy, and a PhD in business, as well as I held a real estate license at one point. And of all those, the things that got me the most jobs were my philosophy degrees. Got me jobs as a high school teacher, got me jobs as a financial advisor, helped me gain employment at a university, helped me gain employment as a manager of a company, right? So philosophy has been very helpful to me, but your mileage may vary. Don't take that to mean that, philosophy's a guaranteed hit. Just understand that with any degree, how useful it is to you will depend on your individual circumstances, and it will depend on your understanding of the world in which we live in, right? Success in your career doesn't come from any particular knowledge or skills you have, it comes from the people you know. So if you want to have a successful career, you have got to go out of your way to meet interested people who are in positions of authority who can help you move on to that next step. If you can't do that, then it doesn't matter what your degree's in, you'll still be unemployed. So, is philosophy useful? Yes, it's about as useful as any other degree. Obviously, the particular jobs you can do with philosophy, it's a little bit more varied, and you've got to really kind of tailor your philosophy education to your real life experience and understanding. But do keep in mind that your your life is not just the degree you get and not just the job you do. Philosophy helps you understand those big questions that you face in life, and it helps you understand how it is you relate to the world, right? Because there's a lot of things that you face in life that no amount of schooling on its own is going to prepare you for. So, for example, figuring out how you want to live your life, where you want to live, what you want to do for a living, what's important to you, where you're going to make your stand morally, right? Those are questions that a degree in engineering or business or whatever isn't going to help you answer. I believe philosophy is very useful, and I believe it's one of those things that's not really threatened by AI. One, because philosophy requires a lot of nonlinear thinking, it requires a lot of um, outside the box, unconventional thinking. And then two, I don't think there's much of a business incentive to have AI doing a lot of philosophy. And then three, philosophy is already viewed as a by the public, it's already viewed in kind of a negative light as a somewhat useless degree. So I don't think as much of a threat. I mean, what's it going to do? Make philosophers even less useful, right? Like, so I believe philosophy is very useful, and I do believe that if you are someone who's interested in trying to solve the big problems of society and trying to understand society, I think philosophy is a beneficial thing. I also think philosophy is really good when it's mixed with knowledge of some other discipline. So myself, that's a knowledge of philosophy mixed with business. I think it allows you to be a lot more nimble in the field, and it allows you to see patterns within your field of study that it may not. So, for example, a mix of philosophy and engineering, or a mix of philosophy and nursing, or a mix of philosophy and medicine, right? It allows you to understand how it is that you can connect yourself to the wider problems of the world. So, those are my thoughts on philosophy's usefulness. Final thoughts: I think philosophy is worth your time. I do think you should do it. Um, it's not a killer degree that's going to get you a job straight out of college, but for that matter, most degrees aren't going to get you a job straight out of college, just point blank. Your degree in business, marketing, or communications probably isn't going to get you a degree out or get you a job right out of college. The thing that is going to get you a job out of college is making friends with employers, whether that's through things like jobs that you work while you're in college or through family connections or whatever. So if you want to get ahead in life, um, a degree is only part of the puzzle. The other part is human connections. You'll never find a good job sitting around and applying online, and you'll never find a good job by just chasing credentials. You have to get out there, meet people in power, and get on their good side. So that's my thoughts on philosophy. I hope this has been helpful to you. Um, if you're in my Philosophy 101 course, we're going to spend the next 8 weeks covering a variety of different topics in philosophy. If you're in my Philosophy 110 course, we're going to study critical thinking. And if you're in my Philosophy 200 ethics, we're going to cover a lot of issues in ethics. If you are someone who's just watching this online on YouTube or whatever, leave a comment, subscribe, like, do all that good stuff. And I thank you so much for your time. You have a wonderful day.